Welcome to another episode of the Supply UnChained podcast. Today it is my honor to welcome our guest, retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General Max Stitzer, to the podcast. Good morning, General Stitzer. Thanks for making time.
Hey, good morning, Ali. Howdy from Utah.
Yep, howdy from New York. How are you doing out there?
Oh, so good. Better than I deserve, as always.
Well, sir, thank you for your service, and so thank you so much for getting on to this podcast. As you know, on this episode, we will be looking into your background, trying to understand from a military perspective, or just what you do these days with startups, getting them into and helping the warfighter at the end point, understand what's needed, and of course, as always open to your feedback and your unfiltered recommendations. So with that, why don't we get started with probably understanding how you got started? So General Stitzer, how did you end up in the military? Before that, what were you doing before you got into the military?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that question, and I appreciate you thanking me for my service. It's one of the things I've talked about since and obviously during my long career in uniform. I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force right out of high school. So when I turned 18 and was a high school senior and was kind of compelled to figure out what my path in life would be and make a decision, I wanted to be part of something that was consequential, that mattered, where I could serve. Certainly I was not a very smart or sophisticated kid at that time, hadn't seen the world and didn't know a lot about other people or even myself. But I knew military service was an important option for sure. In my family's heritage, I had a grandpa who was a World War II enlisted flyer in the China-Burma-India theater. I knew about the great and important work that he and the Greatest Generation did for our nation and for free people all over the world, to fight and defeat fascism. He was a hero and an example to me. And I thought, in the end, when I made that decision, if I could render even a fraction of the kind of service he did, then that would probably be something I should do with my life that mattered. When confronted with the opportunity to join, the minimum enlistment was 6 years. And as an 18-year-old, that scared the heck out of me. I thought 6 years from now, I'll be 24 years old. That's a long ways off. So the irony is that I ended up serving 4 decades, right? So I far surpassed that first enlistment, re-enlisted, finished college, and had the opportunity to compete for a commissioning as an officer. Went to officer training school and trained as an aircraft maintenance officer, and that set the trajectory that I followed for then the next 3 decades as an officer, ultimately retiring as a general. Along the way, and especially during the generation that I was fortunate to serve in, it became very popular for people, Americans and around the world, to thank us for our service, like you did. And my airmen would come to me often and they'd say, sir, I didn't join to be thanked. I never know what to say. I feel kind of embarrassed or self-conscious, which was a lot of people's response when they're thanked for their military service. And I said, well, you can tell them what I say. I say, you're welcome, you're worth it. Because everybody recognizes the military takes an oath of office or an oath of enlistment, and what those words mean. They're very important. But implied, not specifically stated in those words, is all that we swear to defend and support. And that includes the other 99% of Americans who don't wear the uniform, including our industry, our schools, our institutions, our culture, our natural resources, everything that comprises this nation. And so being a citizen in this Republic of the United States of America is truly a team sport, and it takes all 100% of us to do that. And only 1% wear the uniform and potentially go downrange to take that fight to our enemies. So it's not a home game here on our soil. So I think we're all in this together. And so, aligning with that, as I crept towards retirement and again had to make that decision after a few decades what I was going to do with my life, it was pretty easy to make the decision that I did to help serve in industry, especially defense and aerospace and national security sectors. I had observed from my 2 tours at the Pentagon, 7 years total, the interaction, the role that the major defense prime contractors represented. They build our large, expensive, exquisite weapon systems. Nobody else can do that, and we're wholly dependent on them. But we're also wholly dependent as a nation on the rest of industry, on which those big primes are also dependent. And so when I plotted my next course, I thought I could better serve by fractionalizing my time, leveraging my network and experience, and help all those others who normally wouldn't have access to the resources, the network, and the influence that I did. And so predominantly I'm helping still in defense, aerospace, and national security, but the smaller and medium-sized companies. That's been a great journey. I'm looking towards this summer. It'll be 3 years in that role, and it has been an amazing opportunity, including working with you and companies like yours as well, doing all that good work. So very satisfying, and I think very essential. And I'm honored and privileged to be a part of that and to fractionalize my time and effort across a bunch of great organizations that are doing important work for our nation.
Yeah, and it's definitely amazed from, at least from my experience, that if you're not part of the defense industrial base, it's very difficult to understand. So one of the things that, and of course, you were the first general who found us many years ago and started to help us work into the National Guard rescue wings and those efforts. But one of the things that you did, which is not typical of like most generals like yourself who retire, is you, instead of going for the big contractors, you ended up with the small businesses and the startups and the medium-sized businesses. What was your thinking there? Why didn't you go the typical route, right? Which a lot of people go in after service.
Yeah, part of the reason might sound kind of selfish, right? Which is anathema to somebody who served as long as I did and the levels I did. But I felt like at the time I made that decision, and I stand by that now. Though I also stand open to changing my mind, if the opportunity shows up. But the big defense primes already have all the advantages. In many ways, they are extensions of the federal bureaucracy already. If you need to build fighters or bombers or submarines or ships, there aren't really many choices. And so we've constructed an ecosystem where they can kind of act like monopolies. They have access to many retiring generals and admirals and senior executives from federal civil service already. And as I looked across the ecosystem, the landscape in defense and aerospace and national security, I discerned, and I think I was correct. And you can obviously opine on this too. But I think there was a lot of benefit both for me and for the organizations that I could potentially work with to give them that same access to senior leadership into the organizations, the enterprise view and perspective that I have inside the Pentagon, in the federal interagency, across Washington, D.C., and across the aerospace and defense industry. So I thought I can go do one job with a title for one company and be an executive for one of the big primes, possibly, or I could have the same effect and fractionalize and provide the same opportunity and capability and insight and knowledge and wisdom to a bunch of small organizations. And that truly has paid off. And we've had some successes with those organizations that I've worked with, again, including your company, helping where they wouldn't normally have had that access and that expertise resident in their staff.
Yeah, I think General Stitzer, you're one of the few generals that can take a company from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 and beyond, and OTA and all sorts of other things. So talk to me about what you're able to do when you're inside of the large organization versus what you're doing now. What's the difference, right? So when you were a general, or before that a colonel, of course, what advantages and did you have to get essentially acquire companies, right, or capabilities from that perspective? And how is that different now, where you're sort of pushing or finding solutions that the inside still needs, but doesn't know about yet or doesn't know the impact of yet?
Yeah, sure. So one of the organizations that I also work with is called 47G. That's a rebranding from its original name. It still has the same mission of Utah Aerospace and Defense Association. Um, they were originally chartered by our Utah Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity and then spun off as a private organization, nonprofit, that represents the industry here in Utah, adjacent to Utah and Utah-centric, though it's not exclusive to Utah companies. And in time, now in 2026, there are over 250 companies represented in 47G, from the big defense primes, all the name brands that you know, down to single owner entrepreneur LLC inventors who are trying to get into that marketplace. And so one of the initial initiatives they asked me to take on was to help their smalls and medium-sized companies get work, get contracts successfully with the Air Force, specifically here locally with Hill Air Force Base. But obviously the same process and the same concepts work across missions, across services, across military installations and portfolios. And so we crafted, kind of a flight plan that consisted of three things that were important for those small companies. And again, that then I could help them have part of their processes to get federal contracts. The first one is to understand the mission of the organization that you would propose to serve or sell something to, right? So from the very top down, our national security strategy, our national defense strategy, policy and doctrine, warfighter requirements at the combatant command level, and successively all the way down the chain of command to tactical level users. And from that, you could discern your product or service, where it fit into that mission and where it served the mission of a Department of War organization. So understand the mission, the first step. The second one, understand the organization. So now you've got a product, you know it fits the mission, where in that organization is the right place to plug into. So understanding the different echelons of program management of users at the tactical level, all the way up to warfighter requirements at the 4-star combatant commander level or Office of Secretary of War portfolios in the Pentagon. So that's the second step. First step, understand the mission. Second, understand the organization that your product or service would serve and be responsive to. And then the third step, understand and use the language that they do. So the federal government and the military have their own language, their own terminology, their own lexicon of acronyms and things. And they're not particularly good nor interested in teaching you about that in the private sector. And so you can pick some of that up, but not in a way that somebody that's been immersed in it forever, and especially who got to serve at the enterprise level like me. And so helping companies translate their inclination, we're conditioned as a society by retail advertising, retail products. And so we think when we have to sell something, we kind of use that model. And that's not what the federal government and the Department of War here in the U.S. are responsive to. They don't buy a thing or a product per se, they buy a capability. And so translating, again, your product or service, demonstrating that it's a capability that's essential to a warfighting commander's requirement, that's how you get in the door and get sales and everything, and that you're responsive to requests for proposals, requests for information, and contract solicitations. So it's a different world. If you're going to work and operate and be successful in a different world, you learn the language, you learn the organization, and you learn the missions of those organizations that you would serve. And if you do that, that will distinguish you from the competition, which it truly is. For better or for worse, it's a competition. And the best presentation, the best product wins if you do it right.
I'm glad you emphasized that. So talk to me about the difference between selling a product and positioning it as a capability, because a lot of entrepreneurs and people who build new things, they want to work with the defense industry or the military, but they don't know the distinction, right? So typically, and maybe I was the same way 4 or 5 years ago, it was like, hey, this is what we do, boom, this is my product, what do I do now, right? It's basically the big question. It's like I built something, I see a need, but how do you translate that into capability, which is I think it was sort of a bottleneck for us at a time as well, to understand, okay, well, we are doing supply chain optimization, but what does this really mean for the endpoint, the enterprise, whoever is involved in that entire decision chain?
Yeah. So again, that's a great question. I'll try to come up with kind of a generic but simple example. But so the title of this podcast, Supply Unchained, and what we've worked on are technical solutions for the supply chain management, right, across the DoD, and you've been successful doing that in the private sector as well. So there, when you approach them with Eli with Throughput's product, they're not buying a software package. You're selling them the opportunity to optimize their supply chain, which will increase readiness, fleet health, right, material readiness, the availability of warfighting equipment. That's what you're being responsive to. Software, we can go to Best Buy or whatever and buy software. You could make the same claim. Hey, I'm going to go buy a software suite for my home office that helps me compete in the private sector, right? That organizes my finances and scheduling and things like that. So you're buying a capability, not a Blu-ray disc that you plug into your laptop, right? So making that connection and selling it again, that far and away separates you from the competition so often, because they don't understand that. If they go in and ask a company, well, what do you do for us? And they say, we sell software. Well,
so does everybody else.
Everybody sells software. There's 10,001 people who sell that. How does it matter to me as a program manager in the Department of War, one of the services, or across the federal interagency? So that truly is the key, is communicating your capability as a capability, not a product.
Makes sense. And since we're on the topic of supply chains, which is the purpose of this podcast, so how are Air Force supply chains different and similar to commercial world supply chains?
Yeah, well, first, the biggest distinction is they're part of the federal bureaucracy, for better or for worse. And so, they're governed by statute, federal acquisition regulations, service published guidance, all the way down to the user level. There's so many echelons and layers of guidance that directs and dictates that. There's goodness and wisdom in that to a point, right? They're spending taxpayer money. It's our money they're playing with and using. So there ought to be accountability and responsibility for that, and traceability, auditability, right? All those things are in the news, and typically, unfortunately, the federal government doesn't do well at all of those roles and aspects and everything. It's big news when the U.S. Marine Corps can announce they are the only service ever, still after so many decades, that has passed auditability, right, in the Department of Defense. We should expect better, and we should have better. Any successful company can do that. We need to be able to do that in our own federal government as well, right, for sure. So that's those things combined, all the regulations and statutes that govern that, the fairness in contracting laws are good, right, to the extent that they improve competition and they provide a fair playing field, a level playing field for companies competing. But in the end, it's a real drag on the ability to get the capability we need in the hands of warfighters. And my mission when I was in uniform, you can describe it so many ways. Different specialties have different position descriptions. But when I was asked, what do you do in the U.S. Air Force? I said, my responsibility is to put the capability we need in the hands of warfighters. That's easy. And there's so many ways you can do that. That's the responsibility of the supply chain too, right? To get the stuff from manufacturer to wholesale to retail levels into the hands of warfighters. But because it's the federal government, because it's the military, we organize into very strict echelons and silos and everything. And all of those things represent barriers and constraints, for sure. And then because the fiscal responsibility and performance isn't incentivized like it is in the private sector, right? That's also a drag on good and fair and economical use, responsible use of that financing that we get to put capabilities in the hands of warfighters. And so there, as we've seen, there are gross inefficiencies and even fraud, waste, and abuse and corruption involved in that, because guess what? That's what happens when money's involved.
That makes sense. So on that topic, since you've been in so many different parts of the Air Force, I guess the biggest question I have on the supply chain side is, why do maintainers look at supply chain from a different perspective than logisticians, to sustainers, and of course contracting officers, as you alluded to, are trying to track the dollar down to the expenditure, right? So why is it so disconnected? Obviously, as you mentioned, it's the silos, it's the data silos, it's the financial silos, right? It's the program silos,
Yeah.
but from your point, as it from a at the end point, looking backwards, or at the top looking downwards, what is the disconnect? Is it just um, education? Is it just communication? Typically it's communication, but what have you seen over the years?
You know, Ollie, I think I boil it down to recognition of strategic alignment, right? So if an Air Force mechanic on a flight line in a shop at the operational level, in an operational flying unit, in an ICBM unit, whatever the particular mission is operationally, we give them great tools and training and technical data, and then they go to the shelf or the expendable parts bin, and it's empty. That's a failure of an entire supply chain. I mean, it truly is a chain in that sense. Part of the fallacy in that is it's not a chain, it's a web, right? There's so much interrelation and competition for those dollars and for manpower and everything. I think it's universal that there's never enough manning in an organization, right? You never have enough manpower to do all of the things you're responsible for. And so many of these challenges are leadership challenges, right? If you're a supervisor or a commander at whatever echelon in any of the services, in the Department of War, in the federal government, you have to make some choices. And your people respond to what your priorities are and what you put focus on, right? So, there are a couple sayings: what gets measured gets paid attention to, what gets reported gets fixed, yeah. Right? So that communication, the recognition that the strategic alignment up to, a high level warfighter's requirement is or isn't being met, depending on who has the opportunity to know and understand that shortfall, is key to fixing the situation, right? And there are so many echelons above the tactical warfighter level that truly don't understand their own metrics, don't understand the pain and the shortfall that this causes at the tactical level. They don't necessarily see their job as supporting the warfighter. It's supporting whatever their boss's priorities are at a given time. And so that focus is so essential, in the recognition that there should be unfiltered information flow on the readiness lethality of our force and what impact supply chain impacts have on that.
I'm glad you brought that up, right? So with this new generation of warfighter and their technology aptitude, why are we not yet in a position where we can create an alert at the endpoint where they actually need something and get that all the way up to Congress, right? Saying, hey, like, we're going to need appropriations, right? And two appropriations, right? See, from the congressional level, from my understanding, it seems like they're putting in the money, everything will be taken care of. But it's sort of like a leaky pipe, right? By the time it gets to the endpoint, it's not there. So why do you think that is the disconnect? Is it just because, to your point, information's not flowing from the endpoint that's already at, like you mentioned, with every maintenance operation I've ever been with, I've never ever gotten more people. I've always gotten less people because people need to be loaned out, right? So is that, what do you think is effectively going on from that perspective?
Yeah. So the people closest to and most aware of the problems, of the opportunity for positive and effective change, have no authority for decision making or budget. Yeah. Right? You're a mechanic. You're assigned to that aircraft or that jet engine on a stand. Go work it. And all you can do is ask for a part, requisition a part, or recognize that something needs to be placed on order to satisfy that requirement, right? For maintenance or overhaul that you've identified. And beyond that, it has to matter and be responded to all the way up the chain, for sure. Coincidentally too, those same lower level airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines, Space Force Guardians who are new in the service are tech savvy, right? Much more in touch with technology, much more able and efficient to use technology that's out there. The farther you get up the chain, the more seniority there is, and the more people are out of touch with that, and they're part of the bureaucracy. And what do bureaucracies hate? They hate change, right? The first product of a bureaucracy is to preserve the bureaucracy. And if you're inducing efficiencies, and spending money on technology that improves things that you don't understand, you're not going to make that investment. And you and I have seen that personally, right? The opportunity to spend relatively few dollars for large impact compared to the old way of spending a lot of money for far less impact, far less positive outcome, right? So again, you could buy a software suite that's proven in the private sector, that's going to give you significant percentage of increased reliability, maintainability, material readiness, and lethality, or you can continue to do it the way we've done it for decades and just buy more parts and put them on the shelf, which are still malpositioned, which will rust before they ever get used, because we can't get them to the right place at the right time, because the command and control systems don't allow for that.
Yeah, and speaking of that, right, the question is, well, what are the workarounds today, right? What we've done obviously is gone to the National Guard level, so that doesn't really, it's a smaller bureaucracy to play off of, right? Versus like dealing with the whole federal bureaucracy. But given that the endpoints need other stuff, not just software, but they need capabilities, as you pointed out, like what is the workaround for, there's a lot of companies that are looking to help logistics out and supply chain out. Is it best to do what we did, which is go to the state level or the city level, which is a little bit more friendly, less bureaucracy, and sort of scale up? Or is the opportunity, hey, we go to the federal government and try to make the case, which obviously larger companies and newer startups have done. But then the question again becomes, does it match the con ops? Did we do enough research at the end point to say, yeah, this is absolutely a problem before something gets funded and rolled out downhill, right?
Yeah, that's the conundrum we've seen, right? Exactly. So, what it was a conscious decision, to go to Air National Guard units, because we had an easier entry. There were fewer barriers to entry to work with them, to demonstrate the capability at a lower level, and then to be able to scale it up across an enterprise for what's really an enterprise solution. So what's really needed is the recognition that this is an enterprise challenge and shortcoming that can be fixed with an enterprise level solution. But we found it challenging and difficult, almost even impossible, to start at the top and propose an enterprise level solution. So we showed a tactical level solution that can be easily scaled, and it doesn't take much thought or brain power, to translate that and say, gosh, if we're successful in one unit and then two identical units on each coast, it can work across the Air National Guard. If it works across the Air National Guard, it's a miniature Air Force. So it'll work across all the mission design series, all the different kinds of aircraft. So it'll work in the Air National Guard, Air Force Reserve, regular Air Force, and across all the other services, because an aircraft is an aircraft. A major weapon system is a major weapon system. So it's really, again, what we've been talking about and working on is agnostic of the end technological item, right? It addresses the supply chain for those items, irrespective of which service is operating it and what the mission is. So that's the disconnect in placing and buying and deploying an enterprise level solution, but having to enter at the lowest tactical level to successfully demonstrate that, and then to communicate that up the chain.
As more people look to solve that problem, or whatever problem they're trying to solve, is that the way to go, in your opinion? Just be decentralized, figure out how to solve, or do a quick test locally and say, hey, this carries merit, and then go up? Or from what I've seen, I think that is the best way to go, even though there are solutions. And then we could speak about time constraints and how, we don't really have 3 to 5 years to prove out a capability, right? But to your point, if it's hardware or software, is that just the best way to go? And if someone's interested in doing it, what do? Do they reach out to someone like you, or do they reach out to their local congressman? How does it work? Or you can't just go knock on a base, and unless you're looking to be recruited, to say, hey, I have this capability that I want to test out locally?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, because it's predicated on the resources you've got, the time and ability you've got to engage across that entire surface area, because there is a lot. Obviously, congressional engagement is a potential solution as well, right? Because in the end, they own the funding and the oversight and accountability of the military services for how they're spending their money and what their level of readiness is. And so that's one way in. But again, they can encounter the same bureaucratic resistance that we've seen too, right? And when you're talking about separate different branches of government, from legislative to the executive, where the Department of War and the services are, there's still an opportunity for them to encounter the same barriers and the same resistance. So they teach us in all of our service schools, about addressing the entire spectrum of warfare, and you can read Sun Tzu and all the ways to be successful in battle and in war fighting. And all those principles work in this market as well too, right? So understanding the terrain you're fighting on, again, the things we talked about, what the mission is, who's responsible for performing that mission at organizational echelon, and then the language that resonates with them and demonstrates that you have a solution for their problem. All of those are tools, and you really have to use the full toolkit for sure. I think if you look across the history of innovation and how technology is ingested into the U.S. military over time, the best and most prevalent solutions started at the tactical level. The ingenuity of people who said, "Hey, we need a better thing to do a better job," and it worked over time. It took root and got into the system. But those earlier instances of that hadn't encountered 2026's bureaucracy. The good news, and I think there is good news, especially at this time, is politics, partisan politics aside and everything, this presidential administration has populated the political appointee positions across the cabinets, across the federal interagency. And I observe this and talk about this very often with people who are fiscally savvy, technologically savvy, and have a bias for velocity to a degree that hasn't happened with any previous administrations. DOGE was a piece of that, right? The Department of Government Efficiency, that they emplaced at the highest level initially in this administration. And that mindset has not just trickled, but cascaded down through the chains of command and the bureaucratic silos and everything. So frequently in especially the past few weeks, we've seen the volume of regulations that have been cut that are just, again, bureaucratic barriers that are being eliminated now to increase that. And Secretary of War Hegseth has been on an Arsenal of Freedom tour for about the last month now, out in the defense and aerospace and national security industries, talking about that, personally engaging and saying, go faster now, move very fast. It's an imperative. And people are getting and understanding that. And I'm seeing that movement down all the way down to, individual mission sets, programs, contracting officer level. They get it. They understand that's the imperative and the need right now to move faster, to spend money better, to get the capabilities we need faster and better, and to interface better with industry. Because the government, again, notwithstanding the astuteness technologically of our younger, more junior force and everything, the government and the military don't really know how to best effectively interface with industry and find out the technology that's out there. So inventors, entrepreneurs see it, and then they encounter these barriers, the valley of death in acquisition, right? We've got to bridge that better and faster. And that's part of the effort of this administration too, but it has to be bi-directional, actually 360 degree, not just bi-directional, to get that technology that we need, capability in the hands of warfighters. It really is a national imperative.
Now, to your point, right, this administration has pointed out things that I thought would never be pointed out in terms of vehicles and, and obviously they've identified problems to things that have we known about for 20, 30 years, right? As outside of the military, it's a global U.S. supply chain issue. The big challenge, obviously, is like now, to your point, matching those solution suppliers that exist to solving those problems, right? So I think the problem has been identified. There's executive orders out to speed things up, right? But I think the acquisition side is a little bit disconnected, I would say, or not up to par yet to quickly say, okay, they identified this problem, and here's a group out of Dallas that solves this problem, right? So are there initiatives that are being worked on? I know there's a commercial off-the-shelf order, which is I think the Navy is using very effectively, but I know companies are working on acquisition reform. But how do you? I guess they identified a large problem, but how do you get the solution provider that can do it into the government faster? Because I found a couple capabilities that I thought could come into the government, right? But they're not set up with cage codes. They're not set up with all sorts of certifications and CAT cards. So what's being done, just from what you're seeing, to accelerate some of that bureaucracy, right? Because we've been in situations where it's, we would need this tomorrow, go fast, but then it's an eight month wait for like access to data sets and CAT cards, right? So how are we solving that today from what you've been seeing?
Yeah. So one positive movement that we've seen is the change from the PEO structure, program executive officer, to program acquisition executive, and a corresponding significant increase in accountability, visibility, and responsibility pushed down. So effectively, they've eliminated some echelons in that acquisition and program management chain. Again, it's still governed by statute to a large degree. So you still have service level acquisition executives. But again, this administration has put a 4-star general in the Department of War to manage the major weapon system programs, right? Which is new and different. So they've bypassed some layers of program management, weapon system program management, and acquisition at the service level, though the organizational chart shows it at the Department of War level, which is one echelon up from the services, right? But they've cleared the way, so it's a clear path down to the tactical program management level and to the warfighter with the requirements. And also another one was the elimination of the old JSIDS process at the Joint Staff, right, which was governed at the 4-star level and just under the Secretary of Defense level for, again, recognizing, prioritizing capabilities to put in the warfighter's hands. And so that's gone. So that eliminated a lot of layers of bureaucracy and also gave the opportunity temporarily, right, to speed things up as well. So all those are very positive changes, and they've been recognized and talked about for decades. We're finally actually doing something about that and making those organizational structural changes.
Yeah, I remember reading Getting Defense Acquisition Right by, I think, Secretary Kendall a couple of years ago, right? So just when I read it for the first time, it's like, well, how does the top ever communicate to the bottom, right? But say we are moving to the bottom now, being more involved in getting access to innovators. I guess the biggest question I have is there's obviously an incentive for like the entrepreneur innovator to do well and succeed, right? But what incentive is there for the endpoint, besides being under oath, of course, and but like what is their incentive to figure out the use case of a product or technology and then develop it? What is the government doing from like a joint venture perspective, right? I mean, how does that help someone? Like, say I'm in the Air Force and I figured out the solution to the product that you have, right? The upside is obviously with the entrepreneur. What is the upside with the say the maintainer, right, or say the mechanic or the pilot?
Yeah, so that's another conundrum, Ali, because traditionally you hear a couple things in the military. One of them is we ask them to do more with less, right?
Yeah.
So here's what Congress funded us for. Figure out how to do the mission with those resources. That's unfortunate because it squashes innovation and it squashes intellectual curiosity at the lowest level. But you really can't crush American ingenuity. We've always done it. It's the way we've fought and won wars from the Revolutionary War till today. And again, our young people are bright, and they join the military because they want to be part of something. They respond to the recruiting ads that show this amazing equipment and technology, and they fully believe they're joining an organization that values that. And you can't shut them down unless you shut them down. So it's really a distinct cultural campaign is needed to help them understand you are the innovators. You are closest to the problems we have and closest to the solutions too. And we've done that. The Air Force is an example. We've had innovation cells at wing and unit level for a few years now, and that's generated some very good technological ingestion into the system. But it's bounded still by this bureaucratic conditioning that people who've been in the federal government and in the military for very long. Again, you learn to accept less than you should. So that cultural campaign needs to be strong and distinct and persistent, to tell them, find the answers and we will support you. You are the warfighter that we profess to support. If you see a technological solution and know the answer, we're going to listen to you, and we're going to get funding and support for those programs and get that technology and capability into your hands.
I'm glad you brought that up. So obviously the guys at the endpoint and gals they're the best and the brightest, right? And it takes it takes different capabilities and qualifications to be one of those people, right? But for everybody else who's supporting on the supply chain side, what can be done by, say, the civilians and the defense industrial base? Like, do we need more education? Because obviously if someone at the endpoint is saying, this is my problem, this is the solution, but they're relying on a massive, supply chain, right, of people who may not fully understand the full capabilities. Do we just need a better true north, or does this a lot of education need to be required, or do we need to take people from the civilian world out into the field, right, to say, hey, this is the challenges they face and this is why they're asking for that part? Like, what do you think is, like, at least for the next year, 5 years, 10 years, we should be doing for everybody who's on the support side of the road and not at the tip of the spear?
Yeah, so it's, again, a cultural shift is required, and the recognition that it's not a whole of nation. It's actually a whole of the globe solution for sure, because our supply chains are in fact a supply web that extend all over the world, from natural resources in the ground to factories to foxholes. And so we need to recognize the expansiveness of the stakeholders in this, and that all the solutions are just as expansive. And so a few things that can happen. One of them is the essential participation of the industrial base. I think, I tell people this often, I think the entire industrial base is in fact the defense industrial base, because for anything out there produced, innovated, sold, you can connect with a few dots, maybe a few more in some cases, but to the defense industrial base. Innovation comes from a lot of different places, and good ideas get ingested into the system from some of the most unlikely origins. So part of the importance of the industrial base is its power in the economy, and with the oversight and the fiscal funding role of Congress and their ability to hold the military and the federal government accountable, industry's role in influencing Congress to influence them, to influence the military services and the Department of War, is essential, right? So again, we talked about how to enter that fight in those conversations and incentivize participation, and to get the right things in front of people. Industry can be very powerful also in engaging Congress and saying, we know this is a warfighter requirement that we can satisfy. You can help by eliminating these barriers by statute, through funding mechanisms, by line items in defense budgets and things like that. Sometimes you have to force feed it into the Department of War and into the services, and then they will get it, and then they'll use it, and then it'll take root and become a program of record. So you have to attack it from 360 degrees.
And to that point, say you're like a really innovative airman, how do you with the current construct of the Air Force, how do you move up very quickly within the Air Force, right? Is it more innovative projects? Is it completed missions? I think many people probably have the question is how does one become a general, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like in today's world, with obviously different uh, mission requirements, right? What should airmen, sergeants be focusing on to do more with less, but also move upwards, right? Is a good question.
Yeah, so that's important too, right? People that are in touch stay in touch as they move up. And so, kind of again back to my story, and not to make this about my story in particular, but I think it's instructive. Um, People ask what you just asked. How did you become a general? I had the opportunity to mentor a lot of people in the service, and still do that now with my role with the Weber State University MBA program, and as an alumnus with some of the undergraduates at Weber State. And the answer I give them is, I said yes to things that people say no to, right?
Yeah.
I took every opportunity. I took the hard jobs nobody else wanted, and I figured the system's going to produce what it produces on its own, right? So, when I started as an airman and a non-commissioned officer in intelligence, the technical training for that, and then the subsequent on-the-job training where you get experience is really good, and it's time tested. But that was going to produce, if that was all I did as an intel person in the Air Force, I'd turn out just like all the other ones. So I looked for all the other things I could do besides that, and in addition to that, to gain skills and knowledge and experience. And then at some point, when there was competition for an assignment, a position, advancement, or whatever, I was distinguished from the competition because I'd seen and done more, right? Instead of just following the traditional path. And that extended all the way up to, to being a general and serving at the Pentagon. I did stuff far outside my traditional career field. And in fact, that's how we first met. I was kind of a utility player, and I participated in a number of industry expos and pitch days and pitch panels and everything. And there I was one day when Ali Raza came on and pitched his capability with throughput. So if I had done strictly my, assigned portfolio, I never would have seen or done that. And it may have led me to a completely different path in retirement after I took the uniform off too. But that, that enlightenment I had of all the capability, all the innovation that's going out there in industry that's not coming from the big defense primes led me to serving the other components of that ecosystem, what we call the smalls and the mediums.
No wonder you can connect all the dots, right? So what I've seen is that the best supply chain practitioners are the people who never said no to an assignment, which there are some problems with that. I've done that myself, but at the same time, you get so much exposure to stuff that you otherwise wouldn't, right? And just keep an open mind. I think even in supply chain, a lot of people sort of think of supply chain as four walls, warehousing, 3PL logistics, but they don't go into to your point, right? Not everybody realizes that everybody is part of the supply chain, whether they like it or not. And then by default, everybody is part of the defense industrial base of the United States, right? And the globe for that matter, right? So understanding how the world works is sort of critical to understanding supply chains in life, I would say as well. To your point there, right? Because as an airman or a pilot, you're super focused on your world. What can they do today to expand and work with other industries just to make sure they did what you did, right? Because it's hard to do when you have like a full-time job. I remember like when I was a cog in the wheel, right? It was just like, hey, make sure the pumps are maintained, make sure the sand is filled, and make sure the chemicals are on site. But how do you take the time to sort of expand out and reach out to other industries? Because I see a lot of people on the Army Reserve side and the Air Force Reserve and National Guard side interested in doing that. What's the best way that they can sort of branch out and also see what industry is doing and not just stay very siloed in terms of what they're learning from their required training, right?
Yeah, that's that's a great question, Ollie. I think in a perfect world, we would all be unicorns. We would all be so polymathic in our thinking and abilities and everything, that we could all relate and everything. But the facts, maybe it's a sad fact, is any population is a normal distribution, right? So you've got a lot of average in the middle. But there will always be the thought leaders and the innovators at the tail end, a couple segments to the right of that curve, right? I heard a great quote a while back in a meeting, and I've kind of translated that into the other things. So this guy, retired Air Force, brilliant person that I work with, said in this meeting, it takes a network to defeat a network. And I thought, you can kind of impute that on other things. It takes knowledge of an enterprise to operate in an enterprise.
Yep.
Right. And so we need people who are exquisitely subject matter experts, who are the best in their silo, and everybody else who fills in that functional silo. But I think the highest value people are the integrators, the people that can see across and among and into all of those functional silos and pull out the best necessary pieces to actually make a mission happen, to make things work, to find those people who are at the the 1 or 2 sigma at the right hand side, who can make things happen on the backs, on the strength of all the people who do, for lack of better word, just the regular work that's so essential, the foundational work that happens in those functional silos. But at the top, somebody's got to pop out and do and make and be part of the next big thing, for sure. You brought up the Guard and Reserve. The Guard and Reserve is really still, sadly, after all of these decades of being a total force United States military, from the policy that was enacted in 1973, the reserve component of our United States military are people who serve both in industry and private sector lives and wear the uniform in a reserve capacity. So they have a foot in both of those ecosystems, and in so many instances are best positioned to bring the innovation from their one side, from their private sector life and their industry side, into the military. And that's part of the reason they're easier to work with, right? They're more open to new ideas because they're seeing those new ideas being generated and used, and they can translate how effective that would be in their military mission. And so that's one way, is that we could more fully leverage the knowledge and experience and power of the people who are serving in the National Guard and Reserve components of our military, for sure.
I also feel those individuals are more relatable, right? Because when you hear, especially from a supply chain perspective, if you meet, say, Chief Master Sergeant who's worked at Ace Hardware or Target or Walmart or Caterpillar, and I've come across many of them like that. It just, you're able to understand that, they understand both worlds of the supply chain. They know what works on that side versus this side. They understand the bureaucracy. So I'm surprised that, to your point, right, where there isn't a consortium or some sort of association where people who wear both the uniform and also wear a different corporate uniform are thinking of improvements, what they can borrow. The Japanese call this yokuten, which is borrowing best practices from adjacent industries, right? But we have that capability. Some of the best ideas I've seen, or people who instantly got what we do, have been people who've worn both uniforms, both the corporate uniform and obviously the U.S. uniform. So it's definitely maybe the next generation of airmen and people in the Army and Navy and also the other armed branches build something like this. But the advent of social media, I think they could probably do it a lot faster and populate more ideas than other people can. But to your point, exposure, right? Like, not everybody gets the chance to. I think part of it is obviously willing to go out and take on missions, but then the other part is also exposure, right? Which is sometimes people like to be that cog in the wheel, right? Like, I love being the cog in the wheel, but then when you get that exposure, then you get to see more things. So maybe there needs to be systems that allows for people to just go do more with industry or just test it out. I know in the venture capital world, people will go and be a VC for a year and then come back to understand how funding works and so forth. So it's definitely a direction I hope someone picks up and runs with within the military and also on the private side.
For sure. Yeah. The bottom line is, and to close this out, these are good times, and I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
We have the best of everything. The ingredients are all there for the taking. We need to integrate them and put them into action.
Yep. And just speaking to someone else yesterday night, he also speaks a lot of. He's one of the top supply chain minds in the country, but he's like, yeah, the U.S. has all the resources it needs. It's just a matter of synchronizing people who are all doing different things, right? So he calls it the unplanned platform, which is the what do you do if it's not according to plan? What if we find an outlier that we suddenly need and incorporate into that? What sort of superiority does that provide? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Everybody's sort of working on their own thing, and there isn't yet a system or an initiative which sort of brings everybody up and says, okay, this is the true north mission, and this is what if you guys are willing to participate, this is what we're able to do, right? And effectively drive a lot of the supply chain and maintenance improvements that ultimately could overcome a lot of the bureaucracy, but if not, at least improve things from what the status quo is today.
Yeah, we can get there. It's a matter of political will.
And on that point, what are you working on these days to help bridge that gap, right? I know you mentioned 47G, which is a very impressive organization out of Utah. You should look up if you're listening. What are you doing these days now that you're not in uniform to help the warfighter and then suppliers and vendors and startups that help the warfighter ultimately?
Yeah, no, thank you. I, again, being independent and stitching together a bunch of part-time opportunities to fill my time, I have the good fortune of seeing a lot of surface area. And so, again, I'm working at my alma mater, Weber State University, as a member of the President's National Advisory Council. So the overall, management and leadership of the direction of the university. I also advise the undergraduate supply chain management program, which is what I graduated from a few decades ago. And then again, I'm an executive in residence and an adjunct professor in the MBA program. So I see the overall university direction, the really exquisite undergraduate program, and then the MBA program, a graduate level program. So I'm seeing what they're teaching and producing and sending students out into industry, as well as, across the ecosystem, all of the technology in defense, national security, and aerospace. And then I get to serve on some nonprofit organizations that are doing good. A lot of them have a patriotic mission or adjacent to the military and serving military families and organizations. So just keeping in touch and seeing, I think all of those benefit each of the other things that I'm doing and help keep me current and relevant.
And General Stitzer, I'll call you Max for once, but how can
Max?
Yeah. But Max, how can people listening to this podcast reach out to you or get connected with you, right? Because as just as an anecdote, you were instrumental in terms of getting us out of our phase one pitch, doldrums to actually getting fielded and now luckily being a phase 3 contractor. But if there's another company just like us, or people are willing to just speak to you and learn, and obviously Air Force professionals and people and members in uniform to understand how to plan out their journey, right? What's the best way to reach you? Is it email, phone? Is it LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, absolutely. LinkedIn is an exquisite platform. If you cultivate and curate your feed so you don't get any of the typical social media junk and keep it business, it is absolutely a fruitful forum for sure. So I'm available on there, and look forward to connecting with you.
Well, thank you, Max, so much for your time, and we look forward to staying in touch, and I hope you have a great weekend, and thank you again, sir, for your service.
Thank you for all you're doing, Ollie. Thank you.